Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 181, Debut Match. The game ended before there was time to hold back. That was incredible. I can't believe Harry Potter actually caught the golden snitch with his mouth. Potter really is an excellent seeker. I thought Gryffindor was done for when his broom broke. I'm certain Gryffindor is going to win the Quidditch Cup this year. Everyone in the castle was buzzing with excitement, talking non-stop about the dramatic events of the match. Kyle made his way through the crowd without a word, finally slipping back to the Hufflepuff common room, where he found Cedric and Connor waiting. As soon as they saw him, Cedric couldn't hold back. What on earth happened? Why are you just getting back now? And what was that about a phoenix? The phoenix belongs to Professor Dumbledore. It's, well, sort of his pet, Kyle explained. But it mostly stays in the headmaster's office, so you rarely get to see it. Connor thought about this for a moment. So the headmaster was the one looking for you earlier? Yes. Kyle glanced around to ensure no one else was listening, then lowered his voice and told them what had happened in the restricted area. The three-headed dog went completely berserk. Cedric blurted out in surprise, then clamped a hand over his mouth, realizing he'd spoken too loudly. Are you serious? Of course, Kyle replied. Do you think I'd have just left the match and not come back until now? But who would do something like that? Cedric asked, frowning. Using a confundus charm and dark magic on a three-headed dog, what good would that do? I don't know. Kyle shook his head. Professor Dumbledore hasn't had time to investigate yet. Despite his words, Kyle's thoughts turned to Quirrell. The restricted area, Fluffy, the guard of the Philosopher's Stone. This all pointed to Quirrell, but Kyle couldn't piece together the man's goal. If Quirrell wanted to get past the trapdoor, angering Fluffy seemed like a pointless move. It would only make things more difficult. And if Fluffy escaped, Hogwarts could be forced to close, ruining any chance Quirrell would have of getting to the Philosopher's Stone. I just can't figure it out. Anyway, it's best if we steer clear of the restricted area for a while, Cedric suggested, a shiver running through him as he imagined the three-headed dog. If we need to go to the fourth floor, we should avoid that part as much as possible. There's no need to be that nervous, Kyle reassured them. Professor Dumbledore's handling it. Just be careful and stay away from there if you don't have to go. Hearing Kyle's words, Cedric and Connor lost all interest in discussing Quidditch, and the three soon went their separate ways. It wasn't until Kyle had left that Cedric remembered something he hadn't asked. Why had the headmaster sent for Kyle and not Professor McGonagall when something so dangerous was happening? Could it be because Kyle had worked with Mr. Scamander before and had some knowledge of the three-headed dog? Cedric looked up. But by then, Kyle was already gone, out of the common room, and Cedric had missed his chance to ask. For the next while, Kyle didn't return, not even for dinner. No one knew where he was. It was as if he'd vanished without a trace. It wasn't until the next afternoon, just before the game, that Cedric finally spotted him again in the changing rooms. Kyle was holding his broom and chatting with Harris. Very good, Kyle. Harris gave him a friendly pat on the shoulder, smiling as he said, I was starting to think you'd be too nervous to sleep, and I'd have to get you a pepper-up potion. After some encouraging words from Harris, the team checked their brooms and uniforms one last time before lining up for the start of the match. The stands were packed as usual, and as last year's champions, Hufflepuff's team was greeted with deafening cheers when they took to the pitch. Kyle noticed, however, that there were far fewer professors in the commentary box than the day before. Apart from Professors McGonagall and Snape, most of the seats were empty. Seems the professors have also heard about Fluffy, Kyle thought as he walked with the others to the center of the field. Madame Hooch delivered her usual pre-match pep talk before blowing her whistle. 15 broomsticks soared into the air. It's Kyle from Hufflepuff, he's the first to grab the quaffle. Lee Jordan shouted from the commentary box. He's a newcomer, only joining the team this year, and rumor has it he scored spectacularly in the selection match. I just don't know if he'll be able to. Oh, he passed the ball to the team captain, Harris. For some reason, Lee Jordan suddenly adopted a more serious tone. Murmurs of discontent floated up from the stands. The commentary, without any hint of his usual flattery, was not what the crowd wanted to hear. But Lee Jordan ignored them. After all, he had just spent the entire previous night, until dawn, under Professor McGonagall's strict supervision, copying out an entire book on proper Quidditch commentary. He had nearly collapsed in her office. It had only been one night, he had to rein it in a bit. As we all know, Hufflepuff's Harris is one of the best chasers, and his coordination with Kyle. Oh my goodness, am I really seeing this? It's a dual attack. Ravenclaw's keeper misjudged the block, and Kyle has the quaffle. Goal. Hufflepuff scores. Less than 10 seconds into the game, they've set a new record for fastest goal. The stands erupted with cheers as fans leaped to their feet, hands in the air. Well done. On the pitch, Harris flew over and gave Kyle a light slap on the back. Perfect teamwork, exclaimed Lee Jordan. Ravenclaw is in trouble. As if to prove his point, the rest of the game was soon dominated entirely by Kyle and Harris. Like two unstoppable scoring machines, they sent the quaffle through the goalposts time and again. Ravenclaw's beaters did their best to stop them, but Hufflepuff had anticipated every move, and the bludgers never even came close to Kyle or Harris. After just half an hour, the score had reached a ludicrous height. Hufflepuff, 170. Ravenclaw, 0. Even Lee Jordan began to feel a little dazed, and as he commented on Ravenclaw's performance, a note of sympathy crept into his voice. Poor Wiesner, he's as clueless as the keeper for the Chudley Cannons. Let's hope he can hang on. It was at that moment that Kyle and Harris realized they might have taken things a bit too far. Harris gave the dazed Ravenclaw keeper a slightly apologetic look and offered a silent wink. Kyle nodded, understanding. They planned to ease up a bit and let Ravenclaw score a few points. But just then. Wait a minute, is that the golden snitch? A glint of gold flashed near the bottom of the pitch. Cedric and Cho both sped downward in unison, racing toward the ground at a breathtaking pace. But Cedric's broom was just a bit faster than Cho's, and he reached the bottom first. I've caught the snitch. He raised his arm high, a golden object glinting between his fingers. The game was over. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 182, I shouldn't have told you this. Nothing at Hogwarts was easy, except for the Quidditch match, where Hufflepuff had swept Ravenclaw effortlessly. The moment Cedric captured the golden snitch, the Ravenclaw students in the stands were left utterly stunned. They sat there in silence, lost in their thoughts, unable to say a word. Professor Flitwick had made an appearance during the game but had only stayed a few minutes before leaving with his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Less than half an hour later, the scoreboard read 320-0. Although Ravenclaw was used to finishing at the bottom in Quidditch year after year, such a drastic score was still hard for them to accept. That glaring 0 on the board stung. Just one goal would have made a difference. Why were you in such a rush, Cedric? Kyle whispered after they returned to the ground. We were going to win anyway, so there was no need to catch the golden snitch. I'm a seeker, Kyle, Cedric replied, shooting him a disgruntled look. My job is to keep an eye out for the golden snitch constantly. How could I focus on the score at the same time? And have you ever seen a game where the seeker just lets the snitch go? Giving up on it means giving up on honor. No seeker would ever do that. But you guys. Cedric's voice lowered as he grit his teeth. I took my eyes off the field for just a moment, and by then it was already 17-0. This score is absurd. Couldn't you have let up a little? What, are you guys not planning to go the charm class anymore? I didn't mean to either, Kyle said with a wry smile. It was just too easy, and before I knew it, the game was over. They exchanged a look and sighed in unison. In the days that followed, Ravenclaw's morale was at an all-time low. The friendly relationship they once shared with Hufflepuff had shifted dramatically. Although there were no outright conflicts, tension hung heavily between the two houses. Even when a Hufflepuff student occasionally tried to greet them, the Ravenclaws would turn away as if they hadn't heard. In this atmosphere, Kyle and Cedric found themselves actively avoiding Cho, too embarrassed to speak to her. But Cho herself didn't seem too bothered, and as the days went on, any hard feelings she might have had gradually faded. In her view, Hufflepuff had won fairly, and Ravenclaw's loss simply reflected their own lack of skill. After a transfiguration class, Cho spotted Kyle, who was just about to dash out of the room. She rolled her eyes with a sigh and called out, "Hey, Kyle." Kyle froze mid-step, turning stiffly as though he had only just noticed her. "Oh, Cho. Ahem, I didn't realize you were here." Cho laughed at his awkward excuse, shook her head, and took a deep breath. "I missed some notes in class, could I copy yours?" "Sure, of course." Kyle quickly pulled a black notebook from his bag and handed it to her. "Take as long as you need, or you could just keep it if you want." "Thanks," Cho replied, taking the notebook. "No problem," Kyle said, smiling sheepishly before hurrying off. After he left, Cho slipped the notebook behind her textbook. As a Ravenclaw, she hadn't really forgotten to take notes, she'd just made up an excuse to spare Kyle and Cedric from feeling awkward around her. Watching Kyle's obvious relief as he left, Cho rolled her eyes with a sigh. Honestly, silly boys. Kanna, who sat beside her, nodded in agreement. Across the great hall at lunchtime, Kyle recounted his encounter with Cho to Cedric. Once they finished eating, he left the castle and made his way toward the Forbidden Forest. Yesterday, Dumbledore had successfully healed Fluffy, the three-headed dog, and Kyle had visited the restricted area to check on him. The moment he entered, Fluffy bounded over, all three heads eagerly nuzzling into his arms, showing no signs of his recent ordeal with dark magic. The dog was carefree, as if nothing had happened, a likely benefit of not being particularly bright. Today, Kyle wanted to see how Hagrid was doing. While Fluffy was under treatment, Hagrid had faithfully guarded the entrance to the restricted area, barely eating and keeping everyone away. Each day, Kyle had brought him food, but it was always left untouched. Kyle figured that if Dumbledore had delayed much longer, Hagrid might have starved himself. When Kyle reached the hut, he saw Hagrid cooking something over the fire. Though he looked thinner, he seemed well. "Kyle, you're here." Hagrid greeted him warmly. "I just finished class and thought I'd stop by to check on you." Kyle smiled, then glanced toward the fire. "Are you making lunch?" He leaned over to peek inside the pot but instantly regretted it. Inside was a thick, strange-looking soup, a murky brown with hints of red and purple. Bubbles surfaced occasionally, and as he got closer, a strong, fishy odor wafted up. "Hagrid, are you making potion?" Kyle asked hesitantly. He had only ever seen liquids of this color and texture in potions class, or more specifically, in Michael's cauldron during his failed attempts. "Potion? Not a chance," Hagrid replied, shaking his head. "This here's for Fluffy. Got dragon's blood and dragon liver in it, all his favorites. Poor little thing must be shaken after all he's been through, so he needs some proper nourishment." Realizing it was for Fluffy, Kyle said nothing more. Judging by the tastes of the massive, three-headed creature, this failed potion, or rather, soup, was probably quite the feast. Hagrid gave the pot a few vigorous stirs, then brought out some rock cakes and tea, placing them in front of Kyle. "Fluffy's all right now. Livelier than ever." "I couldn't be more grateful," Hagrid said, wiping away a tear. "That poor little fella. If I ever find out who used dark magic on him, they'll regret it." As he spoke, Hagrid's grip on a rock cake tightened, crushing it in his hand. The larger crumbs fell into the pot, clinking against the side. Kyle laughed awkwardly. Only Hagrid would call a terrifying, 10-foot-tall, three-headed dog little fella. Ignoring Hagrid's affectionate wording, Kyle asked, "So, has Professor Dumbledore found out who's responsible?" "No," Hagrid replied with a sigh, "but he will. There's nothing that happens at Hogwarts that Dumbledore doesn't find out about. Otherwise, he wouldn't have put the Philosopher's Stone in." Oh, I shouldn't have said that. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 183, The Unique Abilities of Unicorns, Philosopher's Stone. Kyle raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "The one made by Mr. Nicholas Flamel. Hogwarts is hiding something like that here." "Don't ask, Kyle. I'm not saying anything more." Hagrid's face turned serious. "This is top secret, not something for young wizards like you to worry about." "Top secret, huh?" Kyle shrugged nonchalantly. "In that case, I won't ask." Hagrid froze, taken aback by Kyle's easy compliance. He'd expected a round of relentless questioning. Harry had certainly pestered him long enough on the topic. They continued chatting for a while, and true to his word, Kyle didn't bring up the Philosopher's Stone again. This seemed to relax Hagrid, who let out a sigh and, almost without thinking, said, "To be honest, I wish Harry could be a bit more like you." "Potter? What about him?" "Nothing, nothing." Hagrid quickly shook his head. "I just mean, he was here earlier." "Well, that's a good thing, Hagrid," Kyle said with a grin. "It means he cares about you too." "Yeah." Hagrid nodded thoughtfully. It was nice to feel cared for, though he couldn't help but wish Harry's curiosity was a bit less intense, so that every visit didn't involve questions about Fluffy or the Philosopher's Stone. "By the way, when did Potter come by?" Kyle asked. "About an hour ago," Hagrid replied after thinking for a moment. "They only had one class this morning, so they came a bit early." "They?" "Yeah, Harry, Hermione, and Ron," Hagrid said. "The three of them have been spending a lot of time together lately." As he spoke, Hagrid stood up and stirred the pot with his spoon, then ladled up a bit to taste. Kyle felt his stomach churn at the thought, but he kept his discomfort in check. "By the way, Hagrid, has anything strange been happening in the Forbidden Forest recently?" Kyle asked. "The Forbidden Forest?" Hagrid looked thoughtful, spoon in hand. "I don't know, honestly. I haven't been inside the forest for days, what with Fluffy needing my attention." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, it just occurred to me," Kyle said casually. "The person who used dark magic on Fluffy must have had a reason. But now that Professor Dumbledore's on alert, he probably won't try anything with Fluffy again. I was just wondering if he might shift his focus to the Forbidden Forest instead." "You think he'd target the magical creatures in the forest?" Hagrid's eyes widened, and he dropped the spoon with a loud clang. "It's only a guess," Kyle replied, keeping his tone calm. "But there are plenty of dangerous creatures in the Forbidden Forest, werewolves, acromantulas, unicorns. If someone provoked them, they could cause serious trouble if they ventured out of the forest and got too close to Hogwarts." Hagrid picked up the fallen spoon and paced back and forth, clearly concerned. Finally, he nodded with a determined look. "You're right. I'd better go have a look in the Forbidden Forest soon." "Be careful," Kyle warned. "Whoever used dark magic on Fluffy must be powerful, possibly as strong as a professor. So just, make sure you're cautious in there." "Don't worry, I'll be careful," Hagrid said, unconsciously patting his pink umbrella before walking over to the rack by the door. He took down a crossbow hanging there and gave it a couple of twirls. "In the Forbidden Forest, this thing's often more useful than magic." "But you're wrong about one thing, Kyle," Hagrid said with a smile as he returned the crossbow to the shelf. "Unicorns aren't dangerous. They're pure, gentle magical creatures, and their attacks are simple. Even if they somehow went berserk, they couldn't do much harm. You just have to be careful to avoid the horn." "That's not entirely true," Kyle countered. "Don't forget Professor Kettleburn. He was only sent to St. Mungo's last summer after a unicorn horn pierced his stomach." Hagrid hesitated. He wanted to argue that Professor Kettleburn was a special case. After all, any reasonable person wouldn't try to hug an angry unicorn's head. According to Kettleburn, he'd only been attempting to calm the creature down. Hagrid never quite understood that logic. He wasn't sure if the unicorn was calmed, but Kettleburn was calm enough during treatment. He'd even fainted. And remember, a unicorn's threat isn't just from its horn, Kyle continued. Its blood is also deadly. If it somehow ended up in a crowded place and, say, exploded, it could splatter blood on people's faces. They wouldn't even need to drink it, just a touch to their lips would be enough. That curse is near impossible to break. Hagrid was left speechless once again. Unicorns exploding? It seemed even more unlikely than Kettleburn's unfortunate encounter. Think of Fluffy, Hagrid, Kyle added, his tone serious. Whoever hurt him was willing to harm a gentle creature like that. Imagine what they'd do to a unicorn. Ah, yes, you're right. Hagrid's expression turned solemn, and he nodded thoughtfully. I'll keep a close eye on the unicorns. I know the spots where they like to gather. Kyle stayed a while longer, chatting with Hagrid, but soon he said his goodbyes and headed back to the castle. The strange smell from Hagrid's pot was getting stronger, and Kyle feared that if he stayed any longer, he'd lose the lunch he'd just eaten. The afternoon brought defense against the dark arts. As Professor Quirrell entered the classroom, everyone noticed a bandage on his arm. "Professor, are you hurt?" one student asked. A little injury," Quirrell stammered. "At the Quidditch match, someone accidentally pushed me off the bleachers, and I broke my arm." "But Professor, that was days ago," someone else pointed out. "When I broke my arm during flying lessons, Madame Pomfrey healed it instantly." "It's different," Quirrell replied, blushing. "I was cursed by a vampire. Very hard to heal." "But Professor, last time you said the vampire's curse just made you afraid of drafts," another student interjected. "Ah, perhaps. I forgot to mention additional symptoms," Quirrell mumbled, clearly uncomfortable, and quickly redirected the class to avoid further questioning. Today's lesson was on how to identify and deal with red caps, vicious creatures that look like goblins and lurk where blood has been shed. They haunt places like castle dungeons and battlefield trenches, lying in wait to ambush lost travelers. Lacking a red cap for demonstration, Professor Quirrell had substituted it for a large lizard. The lizard was somewhat of a veteran in defense against the dark arts classes. It had previously served as a hinkapunk and now seemed almost like an assistant professor. Imagine this is a red cap," Quirrell said, settling the lizard on his shoulder as he began to stammer through the reading. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 184, The Odd Trio. Professor Quirrell's defense against the dark arts class was as dreadful as always, and with his injured arm, the job of handling the teaching assistant fell to the students. A Gryffindor boy at the front of the class had the dubious honor of holding the large lizard, though he looked more like he was clutching a venomous snake. His face went pale as he stood there rigidly, as if he were cradling Professor Snape's animagus form rather than a harmless reptile. "I've had it with this," Kyle overheard him muttering to a friend as they left the classroom. "That lizard reeks like Professor Quirrell. It must eat garlic daily, and now I smell like it, too. Ugh. I hope a cleaning spell works, otherwise, I'll need a new uniform." Kyle instinctively sniffed his own robes, picking up a faint trace of garlic, though it was far less potent than Quirrell's. Having just left the defense against the dark arts room, he figured no one else would likely notice. Still, it was enough of a smell to make anyone consider fresh clothes. As they made their way down the corridor, Kyle suddenly stopped on the second floor and turned to his friends. "I'm heading to the library. Anyone want to come along?" "Nope, not me," Mikkel and Ryan both shook their heads quickly. Kyle had expected as much. They only ever ventured into the library for last-minute homework. Otherwise, they steered clear. "I'll pass too," Kanna said after a moment. "I've been reviewing the notes Professor Snape gave me, and I need to go over them by Christmas. No extra reading for me." "Snape's notes?" Kyle's eyes lit up. "Can I borrow them?" "Don't worry, I'll just make a copy so it won't take up your time." Last year, he had received Professor Flitwick's Charms notes, which contained unique insights and practical tips not found in any textbook. That knowledge had proven invaluable, the kind of treasure money couldn't buy. "Of course, you can," Kanna replied without hesitation. "Head to the library first, and I'll go back and make a copy for you. But, be careful with them. Professor Snape made me promise not to share them." As she spoke, Kanna's expression turned a bit awkward. When Snape had given her the notes, he had specifically mentioned someone's name, though she hadn't had the nerve to bring it up with the person in question. "Don't worry," Kyle assured her, giving his chest a confident pat. "I'm Hogwarts' best-kept secret." "Anne." Kanna continued, "My doubling charm isn't as good as yours. It'll only last a week, so you'd better read them quickly." Kyle waved off the concern. With his self-writing quill, he could copy the notes in half a day. A week was more than enough time. After finalizing their plans, Kanna, Mikkel, and Ryan returned to the common room, while Kyle took a detour to the library. The library was bustling, packed with students despite class having just ended. Kyle quickly spotted the Gryffindor trio sitting at a table near the entrance, with a stack of books towering beside them. He took a quick, curious glance their way. It was no surprise to see Hermione, who practically lived in the library. But Harry and Ron were a different story. They were more like his roommates, the type who rarely set foot here. And oddly, they had no parchment or quills, suggesting they weren't there to do schoolwork. "Here to read?" "That's unusual." Kyle didn't linger on it. He simply gave them a quick nod of greeting before heading off to find Madame Pants. "Harry," Ron whispered, watching Kyle's retreating figure. "What if we just ask Kyle? If anyone knows who Nicholas Flamel is, it's probably him." "No way." Hermione interjected before Harry could even respond. "It's too dangerous. Don't forget, Snape already tried to kill Harry. We can't involve Kyle." "Yeah. Hermione's right," Harry agreed after a moment's hesitation. He, too, felt it was best to keep this secret to themselves for now. After all, Ron's suggestion was only a hunch. Just because Kyle was clever didn't mean he'd know about Nicholas Flamel. Hermione's extensive research hadn't turned up anything, after all. "Fine, it was just an idea," Ron muttered, shrugging. "If you two don't think it's a good one, that's that." While the trio whispered together, Kyle had already borrowed the book he wanted and was about to leave. As he passed them, he noticed all three looking at him with odd expressions, overly bright smiles and a hint of awkwardness. Why are they acting so weird? Kyle thought, raising an eyebrow. He quickly left the library, deciding it was better to steer clear of them. He had no idea what was going on, but it seemed wise to keep his distance. Hermione, especially, had become a little strange since spending more time with Harry and Ron. It was almost unnerving. Back in the common room, Kyle found Kanna, who handed him Snape's notes. The notebook wasn't very thick, about the same size as Professor Flitwick's Charms notes, and didn't look like it covered everything Snape knew. "Just remember," Kanna warned, "don't let Professor Snape find out you're reading this, or I'll be in serious trouble." "No worries," Kyle replied as he took the notebook, then found a quiet spot to settle in. But instead of opening Snape's notes first, he took out the book he had borrowed from the library, Legendary Alchemical Items. Opening it, he skimmed past the early entries, the self-stirring cauldron, a device that had been briefly mentioned in A History of Magic last year. Its invention had dramatically improved potion-making by reducing accidents and increasing success rates. After the self-stirring cauldron, there were entries on the broomstick, sneakoscope, the time turner. Kyle wasn't interested in these, however. Flipping through the pages quickly, he soon reached what he was looking for. The Philosopher's Stone. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 185, the senior's old textbook. After finding the page on the Philosopher's Stone, Kyle carefully placed the book on the table and read through it thoroughly, the greatest achievement of ancient alchemy, a magical substance with astounding abilities. It can transmute any metal into pure gold and produce the elixir of life, granting immortality to the drinker. 3 Philosopher's Stones have appeared in history, each bringing with it tragic and bloody wars. The longest of these wars raged for 20 years, and the nation holding the stone was obliterated within the first decade. Due to the horrific bloodshed it has caused, the Philosopher's Stone is also called the Bloody Gem. Of these 3 stones, one was destroyed by Merlin and King Arthur, while another was acquired by Rowena Ravenclaw, who, alongside 3 allies, established the renowned Hogwarts school. This feat came at the cost of the complete destruction of the stone. The only known remaining Philosopher's Stone belongs to Mr. Nicholas Flamel, a distinguished alchemist and opera enthusiast. Below the text was an illustration of the Philosopher's Stone, a brilliant red, irregularly shaped stone, resembling an uncut ruby. Kyle stared at the image for a while, examining its details closely. He was still deep in thought when Cedric came to remind him it was time to eat. On the way to the Great Hall, Kyle managed to return the book just before the library closed. Madame Pants raised an eyebrow but didn't comment, assuming Kyle had been doing research for an assignment. For the next few days, Kyle didn't think much about the Philosopher's Stone, instead directing all his attention to Snape's notes. Despite Snape's disheveled appearance, his notes were meticulously organized. They contained detailed annotations and explanations, making even the most complex ideas easy to follow. Inspired by these notes, Kyle remembered something else he had stumbled upon during one of his nighttime excursions. He had discovered an old copy of Advanced Potion Making in a forgotten closet of the underground classroom. It was tattered, but on the inside cover, there was a small handwritten note: "This book is the property of the Half-Blood Prince." TSK, the Half-Blood Prince. I didn't know Snape was such a bookworm, Kyle thought with amusement as he tucked the book under his arm. He decided he'd buy a new copy soon to replace it. Time passed quickly, and soon it was December. Hogwarts was blanketed in a thick layer of snow, and the lake had frozen over. With Christmas just around the corner, the students were more excited than usual, and it took every professor 10 points or more per class just to keep their attention. Of course, a few professors were exceptions to this rule. Professor Binns never docked points for inattentiveness, and in potions, no one dared daydream with Professor Snape at the helm, even if Christmas were the very next day. Today was no different. In the dimly lit underground classroom, everyone was focused on the careful steps required to brew their latest potion, and even the whispered exchanges were kept barely audible. At the moment, Snape stood behind Kyle, observing him with a curious expression as Kyle used the flat of his knife to crush saprophyros beans, expertly extracting their juice. "What on earth is going on? I really don't know what to think," Snape muttered under his breath. He'd noticed Kyle's rapid progress in potions over the past few days. The improvement was far too substantial to have happened naturally, especially since Kyle was already one of the most proficient students in class. Snape suspected that Kyle had somehow peeked at the notes he'd given to Conna, which only covered content up to 5th year. To test his theory, Snape had abandoned the planned lesson on the hair-raising potion and opted for the more challenging draft of Living Death, a potion not typically taught until 6th year. His plan was simple: if Kyle attempted to make this advanced potion, his unfamiliarity with 6th year techniques would expose him. Snape had already decided to deduct 50 points, whether Kyle's attempt was successful or not. After all, the draft of Living Death was notoriously difficult, requiring painstaking precision and a high level of skill. Snape was certain that Kyle's attempt would reveal evidence of unauthorized access to his notes. But now, Snape found himself uncharacteristically stumped. Kyle's method of extracting the juice from the saprophyros beans was flawless. Even Snape himself couldn't have done it more efficiently. And this technique wasn't in the notes, it was clearly something Kyle had learned independently. Next to him, Conna struggled to slice the slippery beans, barely managing. Could he really not be using my notes? Snape thought, frowning. Even the most gifted student couldn't progress this much on their own in such a short time. He decided to keep a close watch, positioning himself right behind Kyle for the entire lesson. When a cauldron exploded across the room, Snape didn't even move. He simply flicked his wand to clear the mess and ejected the unfortunate student from the classroom, all while keeping his gaze fixed on Kyle's work. By the end of class, Snape stared at the cauldron containing Kyle's perfectly brewed draft of living death. For a moment, he opened his mouth, as if about to deliver a scathing critique, but the words failed him. Instead, he let out a sharp, annoyed huff. "How did you do that?" he demanded, voice tense. "Pardon?" Kyle looked up, clearly confused. "I mean," Snape continued, his face hardening, "why has your potion making improved so drastically?" "I'm not sure, sir," Kyle replied with a friendly smile. "It might be due to my time with Director Sykes at St. Mungo's. She taught me a lot over the summer and let me study many of her potions." Pegasia Sykes. Snape's eyes narrowed. He knew of Sykes, one of the most accomplished potioneers of the generation, though he doubted that this fully accounted for Kyle's recent skills. If Sykes's influence were the reason, Kyle's improvement would have been evident at the start of the school year, not months in. "Tell the truth," Snape demanded, staring intensely into Kyle's eyes. "I am, Professor," Kyle replied, his face a picture of sincerity. "If you don't believe me, you could write to Director Sykes yourself, she'd confirm it. Oh, and I recently ran into an older student who lent me some of their old textbooks. They've been really helpful." Snape's expression darkened further. He cast Kyle one last, piercing look before turning and leaving the potions classroom without a word. An older student's textbook? As if any past student could brew such a flawless draft of living death in class. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.